Hi, this is Myrtha Hurtado Rivas. I'm the General Counsel for Brands, Marketing Properties, Licensing, and Anti-Counterfeiting at Nestlé, and you're listening to IP Fridays.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of IP Fridays. Our names are Ken Suzanne and Rolf Claessen, and this is the podcast dedicated to intellectual property. It does not matter where you are from, in-house or private practice, novice or expert. We will help you stay up to date with current topics in the fields of trademarks, patents, design and copyright, discover useful tools, and much more.
Welcome to episode 156 of IP Fridays. Today's interview guest is Myrtha Hurtado Rivas, who is General Counsel for Brands, Marketing Properties, Licensing and Anti-Counterfeiting at Nestlé. And we talk about how brand restrictions are impacting businesses and limiting consumer choice, Nestlé's use of AI tools like Nest GPT, and the ongoing fight against counterfeit goods. But before we jump into the interview, I have news for you. The Unified Patent Court has appointed Mr. Ales Zalar as the Director of the Patent Mediation and Arbitration Center, PMAC, of the Unified Patent Court. He took up his duties on 9th of September 2024. The European Patent Office and the European Commission have signed a landmark agreement to enhance their cooperation in knowledge valorization and further promoting efficient management of intellectual property assets. The EPO president Antonio Campinos has attended the International Conference on IP Strategy for SMEs in Poland and pledged support for small and medium-sized enterprises across Europe. He wants to make the patent system in Europe more affordable for small and medium-sized enterprises and has highlighted the recent 30% reduction in patenting fees for micro-entities. Now let's jump into the interview with Myrtha Hurtado Rivas. Today's interview guest is Myrtha Hurtado Rivas. She is the General Counsel, Brands and Marketing Properties and Anti-Counterfeiting and Licensing at Nestlé. Thank you very much for being on the show.
My pleasure to be here.
So we both just attended the INTA annual meeting in Atlanta, where not only the trademark professionals go, but basically all IP professionals gather there. It's just the biggest meeting of all IP meetings, and also the patent and design people come there. You are on the brand restrictions committee of INTA, and I first want to talk about that. So maybe first of all, can you briefly explain what brand restrictions are and how they are hurting businesses?
Sure. Thanks for raising that question. So brand restrictions essentially can take many different forms. But in essence, what it is that governments or authorities try to nudge consumers into making more healthy choices. So that can be either when they choose an infant formula, for instance, product where some authorities are convinced that it's better to breastfeed children instead of giving them instant formula. But it also can be simply, for instance, traffic lights on packaging with respect to maybe sweet foods where there is too much sugar, or too fatty products where the fat content is too high. And so you can have traffic lights, you can have simply restrictions that forbid you to use certain brands on certain products. For instance, you can also forbid to have small toys to be sold together or being gifted together with a brand, which was, for instance, the Kinderüberraschung egg that we all know from our childhood, that, for instance, in some countries has been forbidden because you cannot incentivize the sale of a chocolate product by joining a toy to it. But we have restrictions also in the, for instance, fossil fuel area, or we have it with tobacco, with pharmaceuticals, with alcohol. It's pretty much everywhere where some authority wants to have a different behavior from a consumer perspective.
Okay, we all know in Germany at least, we all know the cigarette packaging where there's very like pictures of very gruesome scenes there, and so the government wants to frighten people and scare them away from buying cigarettes. So that's some of the brand restrictions are very visual and very and but you were also a moderator on a panel about brand restrictions at the INTA meeting, and the panel was called Navigating Brand Restrictions. What were your main takeaways from this panel, and what, in your opinion, are the most pressing issues at the moment?
So I think the idea of the panel was really to explain to the INTA members as to why INTA had to publish a resolution with respect to the topic of trademark use per se versus advertising. Why is this relevant for brand restrictions? It's because INTA has already been advocating against brand restrictions in a general sense, but we started to be confronted with situations where authorities are trying to limit advertising. And advertising is not trademark use per se. There's a difference. Now, there is jurisdictions where there has been a recognition of the advertising function of a trademark, but there is many jurisdictions where this is not the case, and where INTA advocating against restrictions in advertising is not equal into advocating against restrictions of trademark usage per se. So that's why INTA needed to actually get the endorsement of the board of directors to be able then for the brand restriction committee and others to then go out and advocate with governments and other institutions to make sure that they understand that restricting advertising has also an indirect or direct, depending on brands and obviously on brand owners' property. So that was the idea, and the panel just walked us through several examples. The first one was about fossil fuel proposed law in Canada. The second was about infant formula and the WHO guidelines that have been just issued. And it just explained as to what are the downsides of it and what are kind of maybe other options. And in particular, also showed a little more in detail what are the consequences, right? So the consequences, and this is maybe what you call takeaway, but it was really the sense of the panel was to raise awareness about the fact that brand restrictions are not only a problem for the brand owner, that it literally really limits the choice for a consumer, and sometimes it limits the choice for a safe choice for consumers, because we cannot use then specific colors or brands or imagery to actually differentiate products that are for different age categories or so on. But it also has a problem with respect to the fight against counterfeited products. And it also has a problem with respect to what does it mean when you cannot sell one specific product in one country? So, for instance, if you have a restriction that obliges you to have different packaging by country, what happens to the smallest countries? Can companies then still afford to actually sell those products in those countries? And I'm not talking only about food or tobacco or alcohol. Pharmaceutical products were tackled by this as well. So what does it mean when a population cannot have access to those products? And so I think raising awareness was the most important, making people aware of what it means really and why it's so important that we all kind of speak in accordance to what we want to achieve as brand owners and IP professionals.
Right. You mentioned baby formula, and maybe there are other products in the portfolio of Nestlé, of the whole company, basically company-wide. So I would like to ask you, like, what are the main challenges for you at Nestlé regarding brand restrictions?
Thank you. Obviously, what I'll be sharing is really my personal views. They are not the views of the company, so I'm here not representing the business of Nestlé, but myself as an IP lawyer working for Nestlé and using my own head to respond to these questions. I think the challenges are the same as for any other actually player in the sector. It is that we need to be very careful as to how we brand our products. In particular, we need to also look into how can we extend specific product lines, because maybe we can still continue to sell the products that were already on the markets with few changes, or we need to make changes. So changes need to happen in certain countries for certain products. But then the question is, how do we then foresee the future, right? If we know already that brand restrictions are a growing issue, my role and my team's role is really to advise the business to be having this issue in mind and to make wise decisions as to which strategy to pursue to be able to keep products on the market. So I think it's a bit of kind of trying to understand what's happening today, match it with what we think is happening in the future, and then looking at the business strategy of any company and trying to make sure that those two match to a certain extent, and that you still give the business the opportunities to grow their business instead of being people that say, due to limitations like this, we will not have a business anymore. So it's always finding ways as to how we can preserve rights, but at the same moment, make products accessible to the consumer.
Right. You earlier mentioned making products accessible to small countries where there are strict rules. Do you have an example so people wrap their head around that?
Well, I think I'm not aware of the current situation, but when I was working in pharma, we had the big discussions in Ecuador, for instance, where the Ecuadorian government was proposing to have specific packaging for pharmaceuticals that was different from all the neighboring countries. Ecuador being a small country, what it meant for many pharmaceutical companies was, do we still sell products to Ecuador,
Right.
or do we need to increase the price just because we have a different packaging? And in particular, when it comes to life-saving medicines or even to generics, you don't want to increase your price. You want to make sure that in emerging markets in particular, in small markets even more so, that you can actually make medicines accessible in the easiest and to a fair price.
Right. Very good example. Thank you. So what do you do? Let's switch the topic for this moment. Let's switch to sustainability claims, or sometimes people talk about green claims. Maybe you can talk about the difference. Is there a difference between green claims and sustainability claims? Consumers want to know where the products come from and how they are produced. Maybe you can first tell our listeners what sustainability claims really are and how they are different, if from green claims.
Thanks, Rolf, for that question. I wish I had a direct answer to that, because if there was an answer, then probably a lot of issues would have been clarified already. I think the term, at least green claims in Europe, is a bit more broadly used, in particular because we're talking about the directive of green claims, and that kind of gives it a more official touch. But there is many articles about sustainability claims which more or less relate to the same. So those are simply claims about how you manufacture, or how you actually also treat waste, or how the packaging is produced, or what the packaging is about a product in general. It can also be a service, but most of the times, like flying, right? There's also plenty of sustainability claims around flying, which is a service more than a product. So these claims can be actually whatever, right? Everything that has to do with an impact to the environment can be read as a sustainability claim. Today, we don't have a precise catalog as what is in and what is out. And that's a little bit the difficulty of the topic. I am particularly happy that at Nestlé, the sustainability claims that relate to our global businesses are actually reviewed by my team, which is an IP team that normally doesn't touch that area. But I think it has been of added value for us to do this work and to learn about this. It keeps us even closer to the business, and we are in an area of expansion, right? So that's good news for us, at least.
So you are in close connection with compliance, as with marketing and all these departments to talk about these sustainability claims, probably, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So what are your concerns regarding the sustainability claims, absent from the not having a clear definition, but how will that develop in the future? What do you think? Like this topic, what are your concerns?
I think at the moment the main concern is obviously, like with all new areas of law that come up, is like, when do we get to a level where we have something that can be assumed is a law or is a regulation? If there is some type of structure. What we see today is that many different functions within a government structure can actually have a say as to what a sustainability claim is, but can also impose fines. So sometimes it can be, let's say, the water authority, sometimes it can be the food safety authority, sometimes it's the advertising authority, sometimes it's the unfair competition authority. So pretty much everyone feels like they have a duty to keep consumers safe from confusion, which I think obviously is a big objective, right? Not only for Nestlé, but for, I think, pretty much all of our competitors. We always say the same. We want to make sure that the consumer knows what it's buying and makes a kind of, choice, knowing what they're consuming and what the impact of the product is on our environment. But I think from there, as you can see, when there are so many stakeholders playing in one field, it just creates a lot of work to even monitor, right? So monitoring what type of laws and regulations are coming up, not only at the federal level, but also at the state level, and sometimes even at community level, is as feels sometimes like Sisyphus work, because you start somewhere and by the time you get to the next country, in my case, we have to do this for over 180 countries. It really is, you never end and you never know. Plus, it must be said that it's not because we are seeing decisions being made that the foundation for the decision is clear. So what it is that is acceptable or not acceptable is a little bit written in the stars, and you have to have like your magic ball to figure out what is acceptable. So I think that's a little bit the difficulty. And I think the difficulty that I see increasingly since kind of autumn last year, end of last year, is the fact that now we're even pushing it forward, and we are already seeing that some IP offices start to think that whenever there is something that has a leaf on it, on a device trademark, that may translate into being ecological or green or plant-based or whatever. So I think that, to me, it reminds me a little bit, and maybe the parallel is not the best, but I remember when I was still working at the Swiss IP office, when we started talking about signs that are against the morale. The morale is so vast, and whoever is going to decide what the morale is. And this is a little bit what I'm fearing now, is that everything that's supposed to be green is going to be equal a statement that you are making for or against or in favor of something that you're doing for the environment or for preserving or whatever. So I think there I see a really big risk that IP offices now start going that way, and that we see more and more brands being then refused and not being able to register them based on very, very uncertain terms for the time being. So I think we need to definitely advocate in favor of more transparency and clarity as to what needs to fall within that and how this is assessed, right? So a lot of uncertainty for now.
Yes, and I feel sorry for all the companies having business in Germany, because the German government is so strict with green and greenwashing and all these things, I guess. Let's see how this all works out. But let's switch topics again. I just watched an interview with you about AI. You are really an early on user of AI, I think. I think that the interview was like 5 years ago, where you already talked about applying AI in your daily business, basically. So maybe tell our listeners how you or how Nestlé is using AI in your daily business. How do you apply AI, basically?
Yes, Rolf, I think the interview indeed is already back some years, but I must say that was also privileged at the time, because in the pharmaceutical industry, AI has been looked into since many, many years, in particular for, clinical trials and for the really, I would say, review, harmonization, and gathering of data. AI has been around for many, many years in the pharmaceutical industry. And because I was working at the pharmaceutical industry at the time, we spent a lot of time looking into what is feasible for brand IP professionals or IP professionals in general. What is it that we can use it for? And obviously, since then, things have evolved a lot. It goes without saying that today, most of the service providers that have kind of software or services in the area of anti-counterfeiting use AI, in the area of watching use AI, even for those that actually kind of gather jurisprudence, they use AI to then report, and give some recommendations. So from a vendor's perspective, I think that's pretty much growing. Its usage is growing. So we obviously use those tools. So indirectly, we always use AI. But I think where we've seen the biggest change is within our company currently since last year is we're using tools like Copilot for recording, transcribing, summarizing, reviewing emails, and so on. And we have our own internal ChatGPT, which is called NestGPT, which allows us, because it's closed, to also feed it with internal business information that normally we wouldn't be able to put into a ChatGPT, which is public. And we use it a lot. We use it a lot in negotiations where we need to find a better way to convince our counterpart as to what wording would be acceptable. So a middle way, whenever we look for a middle way, we use a lot the tool to help us find different aspects. We use it a lot for all the meetings, scheduling, travel arrangements. It's pretty much embedded in pretty much almost everything we do. I don't think that there is currently an area where AI is not being used, because when we send emails out, for instance, before we had like legal opinions coming in, and we would spend quite a lot of time in summarizing those, but then we even spend more time making those understandable for the business, because we have to report to the business, right? It's not done with us understanding what needs to be done or what the options are. So today, what I see is also a shift, because a lot of the work that needed to be done by senior counsels can be done by legal counsels or junior counsels, because they can use the tools to do the legwork, and then they can ask the tool, is this understandable for a business person, yes or no? And the tool will tell you, well, a lawyer maybe understands it, but a business person not so much. And it's actually very, very, very specific as to what needs to be changed. So we are experiencing that this helps a lot with training as well. It helps a lot as to how we educate our people to speak to the business, to interact with outside counsel, and to just, in general, be more efficient. So I think, here to stay and probably more to learn in this area.
Right. Right. It's interesting to see that you installed GPT inside the company, because we are also thinking about that, either installing it inside or going the other route and trusting ChatGPT that I think they have this new terms where they promise not to use the data that is inputted if you pay a little more or something. But some people don't trust that. So I don't know. I don't know what to do at the moment. But of course, we are also using it. I just used that for patent opposition work, and that is just fantastic. You can just feed it all these documents and of the prior art, and just ask the tool, okay, where, on which page, in which line is this feature, or like a similar language or something. So it's really, really wonderful. It makes life much easier, and the people who don't use AI really will be left behind in a year or two. I don't know. Yeah. So thank you very much for your take on this. Now, one topic that is really interesting for me personally, because I also dealt with that a lot in the past. Tell me more about the challenges for Nestlé in the field of anti-counterfeiting and how your firm is fighting this. I know you can't really go into too much detail to not in educate the counterfeiters basically, but maybe you can give us a broad overview.
Sure. So I think one needs to be reminded of the context, right? So we during COVID we had a period of time of interaction with authorities, in particular police, customs officers, and so on. In some countries, came totally to a halt. There was not much that could be done, but one has to remember that during that period as well was probably the period where companies were most successful in training, because people understood that things needed to be done online. So the COVID period was actually a great period of collaboration between brand owners and authorities. And this was kind of a basis for the work that came afterwards. So in this directly after at the end of COVID, we saw a little bit of a decline of counterfeited products, because also it was not as easy to get the ingredients and materials to produce, even from counterfeiters. That being said, we went out of that. Many countries were still recovering. Some countries have recovered well economically. And then, as we all know, the next crisis hit us with the Russian-Ukrainian war. And that has had a terrible impact on a lot of categories of products, in particular in the increase of prices. Just to let you know, not only because of the war, but then also because of other reasons, like, for instance, I would say just environmental changes, like, for instance, cocoa production is going down due to, to changes in the climate. So that also raises cost of primary products. So what we are seeing currently is that we are in a very big economic crisis globally. That obviously has triggered an increase of pricing, sometimes moderate, sometimes not, in many countries for a lot of products. And that is the most fertile terrain for counterfeiters, because this is when they can make the most profit, because more people than normally, will go and chase for the cheaper product. And more people than usually will also be inclined to believe that they are making a bargain online or in a shop. So they are just thinking, okay, it still can be, because this is actually the price of the product before the increase, for instance. By the way, just this being said, it's not only not counterfeiting is only a problem. Private label is also an issue that many of the brand owners are facing, because obviously it's a very fertile terrain for launching products that are similar to the original brands and then lowering price and or quality. So that's the biggest issue at the moment. It's the quantity. It's the volume of products that we see on the markets. Also, in areas where before we didn't have issues. So there is new countries where counterfeited products are being spotted. There is new routes of channeling products to markets where there is no production. And so we have to investigate, find out, and then collaborate with authorities, but not only, also sometimes with other competitors to make sure that together we take the right actions to curb down. So I think that's the current kind of situation. The other problems are still the same. I think online is an issue, privacy laws that sometimes don't allow us to get the right information. Timelines are an issue. The fines or punishments foreseen for anti-counterfeiting are still very low in many countries. In many countries, there is also a cultural perception that counterfeited goods are okay, because it still gives work to the local population. So those things haven't changed. Those things are still the same. I think just the problem has exacerbated a little bit more with the current crisis. And obviously online, it's a whack-a-mole game, as you know. It's like, you shut down something, it comes up again. But I think overall, the good news is that we are working much more efficiently with the platforms. Many platforms have understood that their brand reputation is also linked to it. So they're much more helpful than in the past. But we still are facing, each platform has its own system. So very different systems. You have to know all those in order to achieve a result. So I cannot imagine, we have a rather big team, but imagine for small companies that want to tackle this problem, you have to invest an enormous amount of time and sometimes also money.
Right. And tracking down the production sites is still very expensive and costly, probably. But it's interesting that you mentioned that the routes of the anti-counterfeiters have changed a little bit. So it's interesting to see where new routes are opened, basically, and how the counterfeit goods are trafficked to, let's say, European countries also.
Yeah, I think there is one thing, if you allow me, production side. The issue is that the production side not always does only produce counterfeited products.
Right.
They can also produce regular products.
Yeah, exactly.
And emerging markets, to tell a government that they have to confiscate the entire machinery is not something easy to convince, because they know that these people are also producing normal products during the day, and hence they are shutting down something. The same with the fact that you have to destroy counterfeited goods. It might be easier to convince someone to destroy a T-shirt, but when it comes to food, which is essential in many countries, the discussions are very different. So we need to be very sensitive to the needs of the different countries and then try to figure out a good way to deal with the issue.
Yes, you mentioned food, and a lot of the products from Nestlé are either food or beverage. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the dangers of counterfeit goods, especially in this field of food and beverage.
Well, I think that the main danger is really to getting a product which doesn't have the right quality, right? So, but not only that. In particular, we see that there might be also ingredients in the products that maybe are not nocive if you take it once, but if you take it several days or several times, that can have a really a health issue, right? Simply, it can impact your health, and there is just some also quality issues with respect to packaging. So the packaging of counterfeited goods is not necessarily done for the type of storing the product or even shipping the product around. So during that shipping and transport and so on, if you don't have the right packaging, you may impair actually the safety of the product. So that's why it's actually very dangerous.
Or maybe the packaging contains plasticizers that are not allowed for food, or maybe the coloring is not really food coloring, but some other artificial coloring that is not meant to be in food or something. Yeah, so it's really dangerous, and the consumers don't really see that when they are trying to make a good deal or something. So, yeah, very difficult, especially on these marketplaces where even on marketplaces where people are shopping, usually in Western European countries, you can find counterfeit goods. So that's really difficult also for consumers to decide whether something is counterfeit or not, maybe.
Yeah. Definitely an issue also in westernized countries, for sure, not only in emerging markets, for sure.
Yeah, so this has been a really very interesting interview with you. Thank you very much. So do you have, like, in the end of this interview, maybe do you have like 3 tips that you learned in all the time dealing with anti-counterfeiting for businesses, maybe even like startup business that don't really have the experience regarding anti-counterfeiting activities? Like, what would you tell them? What are the 3 most important things to know or to learn that you learned with regard to anti-counterfeiting activities?
I think my first recommendation is to understand that anti-counterfeiting is not a responsibility of the legal department. Anti-counterfeiting is responsibility of the entire company, and in particular, the CEO and the board need to endorse 100% a very clear standing with respect to anti-counterfeiting. Whatever the strategy is, it needs to come from the top, and it's something that needs to be lived by every single employee of the company. So raising awareness and making sure that people know within a company what the issue is step 1, because otherwise you cannot move this organization, small or big or medium sized, to really be on top of the issue. Because this is not a legal issue; it's an issue that has to do with, with all operations, with channel management, with quality, with regulatory, with legal. So it's really goes through the entire company. So this would be my first thing. The second thing, and I've said this many times when I was still in the anti-counterfeiting committee at Inter, it's collaboration. We will not tackle anti-counterfeiting on our own. So if you are a new startup and you think that it's just about your product, I give really the recommendation to reach out to all the others, even competitors in your field, obviously always bearing in mind antitrust laws. But I think collaboration in this area is really important to make sure that we have a common approach and that we tackle things together. Collaboration also with the other stakeholders, first and foremost with consumers. So continue to educate the consumer is paramount, because when we have a demand, we will also have a supply. So the less demand there is, the less supply there will be. And then obviously the collaboration with all the government authorities and other stakeholders in our area, which are the big international organizations, is really important. So I think there is a lot of work has been done and continues to be done. But I think we need to role model this for medium-sized, small-sized, or big companies like ours. And third, I would say is, and maybe this is not only for anti-counterfeiting, but for IP in general, is like, don't believe that it's only the lawyers to contribute to the success of a project. We need every single one of us to really contribute to it. And I think that many times our paralegals and assistants are a little bit forgotten when actually they actually carry a big chunk of the work, and they are essential to actually ensuring that we can actually drive projects like this and be successful. And with that comes together the collaboration, obviously, and education hand in hand with outside counsel, right? So I think it's really essential to understand that this is not something that legal only and only lawyers can tackle. We need really every single person in the IP department to be knowledgeable about it and to be able to use the tools, reporting, monitoring, and all of that to make sure that we actually get something done that's very difficult to do if you only entrust the problem to lawyers.
Right. Thank you so much. That was really, really helpful. We are much better off it because of this interview. Thank you so much for being on IP Fridays.
You're so welcome. It was my pleasure. Thanks, Rolf.
Thank you, Myrtha.
That's it for this episode. If you liked what you heard, please show us your love by visiting ipfridays.com/love and tweet a link to this show. We would be so grateful if you would do that. It would help us out to get the word out. Also, please subscribe to our podcast at ipfridays.com or on iTunes or Stitcher.com. If you have a question or want to be featured in one of the upcoming episodes, please send us your feedback at ipfridays.com/feedback. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes. You can go to ipfridays.com/iTunes and it will take you right to the correct page on iTunes. If you want to get mentioned on this podcast or even have comments within the next episode, please leave us your voicemail at ipfridays.com/voicemail. You have been listening to an episode of IP Fridays. The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by their respective law firms. None of the content should be considered legal advice. The IP Fridays podcast should not be construed as legal advice or legal opinion on any specific facts or circumstances. The contents of this podcast are intended for general informational purposes only, and you are urged to consult your own lawyer on any specific legal questions. As always, consult a lawyer or patent or trademark attorney. Copyright 2014, all rights reserved.